We now have 5 speakers who are going to give us their wisdom on resilience. Our first speaker is Aram Hosie. Aram is a writer, an educator, an activist, and he's from Perth. He's played an instrumental role in helping to change Australian policies related to gender identity. He's advocated for trans people's needs in the global HIV movement and featured in a range of both mainstream and queer media publications. Please welcome Aram.
I'm just going to do some things here, otherwise I'm going to be a disembodied voice behind the lectern. You won't see me. So, I have an opinion, and that opinion is that living is kind of hard work, full stop. And if you happen to be living as a person who is not in the majority, who's marginalised by that majority because of your skin colour, because of your class, your sex, your gender presentation, your sexual orientation, your relationship status, your physical ability, your psychological health, or any other myriad of things, then the majority reckons that makes you less than normal and living becomes extra hard work. But a life that is hard work doesn't have to translate into a life that is sad or a life that wears you down and breaks you. Resilience, which is the theme of these next few talks, isn't about getting through life without ever encountering something difficult. Resilience is about being super tough in the face of adversity. It's about being able to bounce back from the shit times. And so I think that means that trans people have the potential to be the most resilient human beings in the face of the earth, because we get a lot of chances to practice. Every time we misgendered, every time we have to do the Trans 101 again, every time we have to overcome discrimination and ignorance, every time we denied access to services and the right to our own fucking identities, we get to practice and show resilience. If you can survive all that, you're easily one of the most resilient human beings around. But how do you survive it? How do you be resilient? Well, we could look at the academic research or talk to some psychologists, and they'll tell you there are some broad underlying principles that are really good for building resilience. They'll talk about the importance of good social connections that are supportive. They'll talk about learning to accept change, which if you're a trans person, you'd hope you've got a head start on. They'll talk about working on seeing the positive in yourself, in others, in the situation that you're in, and investing in self-care. So things like getting enough sleep, eating well, doing some exercise, some meditation, some leisure, which are all very good suggestions. They must be. They come from psychologists, but they are, to be fair, quite abstract ideas. So today, as we speak, you're going to hear from a bunch of us about, from our own experiences, how we were able to be resilient. And for my part, I want to talk about optimism, about holding the unshakable belief that you're okay, that things will be okay, that you can get through this, and it is just fine that you are not like everyone else. Now, I got a head start on thinking like this because I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And I know what you're all thinking, those people are not okay with the whole GLBTI thing, and you're correct. But being raised as a Jehovah's Witness is excellent practice for not being part of the mainstream, because as a Jehovah's Witness kid, you don't sing the national anthem or do birthdays or Christmas or Anzac or Australia Day. You don't drink, you don't do drugs, you don't have sex, but what you do is spend your weekends knocking on people's door and asking if they want to hear about Jesus, which kind of makes you stand out. But I was taught by my parents to take pride in being different, and I took that shit on board very seriously. Of course, my parents probably were not expecting me to extend that concept to GLBTI pride. In fact, when I was made the patron of Pride in Western Australia, the first trans person and the youngest ever person to have that title, my parents interrupted their whole "we're not talking to you ever" thing to tell me that it was deeply embarrassing for them that I was on the front page of the newspaper. I refrained politely from pointing out that it was them that taught me to embrace rather than run from standing out. Which is not to say that that was an easy journey for me to make. When I was a teenager, I tried to kill myself because I had a growing awareness of my own sexuality and gender, and I knew that that was completely irreconcilable with my family's religion. Fortunately, my perfectionistic tendencies meant that my suicide attempt was unsuccessful, and when the worst thing that my teenage mind could imagine did happen, when I was outed to my parents and essentially disowned by them, I discovered that it was possible to survive that. I discovered that the reality of that, whilst pretty shit, wasn't as shit as I thought it would be, and that I could get through it. And that was an incredibly important life lesson. Since then, every time I've encountered moments when I've thought that things might be really terrible, they might not be survivable, I've thought back to teenage me and remembered that it is possible to get through. And this has come in handy in all kinds of situations, big and small. Like this one time that another trans guy and I thought it would be a good idea to take the state of Western Australia to court over the gender recognition laws. That could have turned out badly, let's face it. And it's not fun being cross-examined about your genitals in court or listening to a Supreme Court judge muse about hypothetically what you would look like in a pair of Speedos at the beach. But by surrounding ourselves with very excellent supportive people and holding firmly to the belief that we were right and that we weren't defective, regardless of what everybody else had to say, we got through it. We didn't only get through it, but it turned out just fine. We had to go all the way to the High Court, but we won. And to this day, I will continue to enjoy that very special moment when I encountered the lawyer representing the state in the bathrooms and made his little head explode as he tried to work out how I was peeing standing up. Speaking of which, peeing standing up takes some practice, let me tell you, and resilience, because when you're a 25-year-old adult and you accidentally pee your pants during the intermission of a show because it turns out you haven't got the technique down as well as you thought you had, you've just got to kind of laugh at yourself, smile, and hold on to the optimistic hope that you'll get it right eventually. Avoiding the problem gets you nowhere, which was the same thing I discovered with those new full-body scanners they have in the airport. I was pretty terrified of them and had a very extensive list of strategies to avoid ever going through one. Because in my head, I envisaged that scenario where I would end up in a small interrogation room with a bunch of security officers in a not sexy, slightly kinky fantasy kind of way. And then one day, I remembered that I was supposed to be brave and not run away from things, and so I went through the scanner. And on my way in, I told the officer, I'm trans, you may see things you're not expecting to see. Went in there and then held that officer's gaze while the machine did its thing. The officer looked at the computer, they looked at me, and then they waved me through, and that was it. The lesson for me is that we're okay, all of us, we are actually okay. It doesn't matter what the world told you. And if you hold on to that belief and you really believe it, then you can get through anything. Thanks.
Thank you, Aram, and that gives us an idea of that judgment and prejudice is alive and well, even if it's only in your own mind.